A critical disparity exists in the global financial system, one that fundamentally distinguishes the national debt of Western nations like the United States from that of African and other developing countries. Understanding this distinction is essential to unmasking a system that many argue is designed to perpetuate economic inequality. This system is currently under intense scrutiny as institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, confront African nations, such as Ghana, for asserting their economic sovereignty. The primary difference lies in the currency of the debt itself. The United States' national debt is denominated in its own currency, the US dollar. This unique position grants the US sovereign control over its monetary policy, allowing it, in theory, to avoid default by simply printing more of its own currency to service its obligations. African nations, however, face a starkly different reality. Their debt is overwhelmingly denominated in foreign currencies, predominantly the US dollar. This means an African country cannot simply print more local currency to repay its loans. It must earn the required US dollars. This is typically achieved through exports, which places these nations in a precarious position. Any attempt to build self-sufficiency, for instance, by prioritizing local food production over cash crops for export, can be met with severe economic or political pressure from global powers.
Economic or political pressure from global powers. International financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank were founded, in principle, to foster global economic stability. However, their operations have created what many describe as an inescapable debt cycle for developing nations. The terms of the loans themselves reveal a startling inequity. The United States can borrow money at incredibly low interest rates, often between 1.5% and 1.9%. In stark contrast, when African nations borrow, they frequently face exorbitant interest rates, often as high as 9% or 10%. The logic is perverse. The entities that require the most financial relief are given the most burdensome terms, while the world's wealthiest nations receive preferential treatment. This structure leads to a troubling conclusion. The operational success of these global financial institutions appears to be predicated on the continued financial struggles of the countries they are meant to assist. As one analyst succinctly puts it, their success is based on our failure. This fundamental imbalance must change. Who can drive this necessary change? It is the children of Africa, both on the continent and in the diaspora, who must recognize this dynamic and declare, "We know your game now. Enough is enough. We are not playing it anymore." This is where the power of a unified African voice, amplified by its global diaspora, becomes paramount.
Let us pause for a moment to express our sincere gratitude to the African Intel community, your trusted gateway to authentic African voices, powerful stories, and enduring legacies that continue to inspire and uplift. Today, we bring you a hard-hitting analysis that the mainstream media often avoids. Please remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to our channel for more relevant and important updates. Our focus today is on a recent development. Why is the IMF suddenly targeting Ghana for attempting to strengthen its own currency? Is this truly about economic discipline, or is it about maintaining control over Ghana and, by extension, Africa? Let's delve into it. The International Monetary Fund has recently raised concerns that the Ghanaian government is manipulating the Ghanaian cedi by injecting substantial amounts of foreign exchange into the market. In simple terms, Ghana is allegedly spending US dollars to boost the value of the cedi, aiming to ensure it appears strong on the global market.
The IMF's accusation is that Ghana's central bank is directly intervening in the market, causing the cedi to improve artificially. They claim to have footprints of Ghana's central bank all over the market and have even gone to Ghana to issue a warning: stop manipulating the market and allow market forces to determine the true state of the Ghanaian currency. Intriguingly, some Ghanaian government officials have acknowledged these interventions, confirming that the central bank is indeed actively working to manage the cedi's strength, while the IMF frames this as a matter of maintaining market transparency. For critics of the system, this intervention raises a crucial question. Is this a legitimate effort to enforce economic discipline, or is it another attempt to prevent an African nation from controlling its own economic destiny? The narrative often presented is that without such external oversight, African currencies would inherently struggle, a narrative that independent success would undermine.
According to reports from 2025, the Ghanaian Cedi has shown remarkable strength, with some analysts calling it the most improved currency of the year, even outperforming the US dollar. On the surface, this appears to be a sovereign nation successfully managing its economy to stabilize prices and boost public confidence. Yet, instead of encouragement, Ghana faces censure from the very institutions designed to provide economic support. This raises a critical question. Why would the IMF, whose stated mission is to foster financial stability, condemn Ghana for taking direct action to strengthen its currency? Is the core issue one of economic strategy, or does the discomfort stem from an African nation demonstrating it can achieve stability without relying on IMF loans and their accompanying conditions? The situation suggests that if Ghana succeeds through its own domestic efforts, it could set a dangerous precedent. It sends a powerful message to other African nations. Financial survival is possible without the intervention of the IMF. This message, the prospect of economic independence, may be what truly alarms the global financial elite far more than any temporary currency fluctuation. The IMF Playbook, a look at Zimbabwe. The conditions imposed on African nations are not unique to Ghana. The case of Zimbabwe provides a stark illustration of the policies international financial bodies often impose. The IMF has reportedly made the following demands on the Zimbabwean government: reduce or eliminate food subsidies for its population, cut public spending, particularly on essential services like education and health, devalue the national currency, implement a wage freeze for workers. These prescriptions stand in direct opposition to the stated goals of the Zimbabwean government. Authorities there have worked to raise the minimum wage and, since the nation's independence, have prioritized the expansion of health and educational facilities, especially in rural areas where over 80% of the population resides. The IMF's conditions are thus interpreted as a directive to the government to halt programs that directly benefit its people, particularly the most vulnerable classes of peasants and workers. This dynamic transforms loans from a tool of support into a mechanism of control, overriding the sovereign decisions of a national government.
To counter this, local researchers and educators are working to bring this knowledge to community leaders, women, and youth, helping them understand how the global financial system directly impacts their lives and empowering them to advocate for change. The situation is not without its internal critics. Some Ghanaian leaders and economists share the IMF's concerns, arguing that the central bank's strategy is unsustainable. One prominent official noted that while fiscal policy contributes to the cedi's appreciation, the primary driver is the Bank of Ghana's direct intervention in the market. He argued, when you inject US dollars into the Ghanaian market, it creates a false sense that investors will think that your cedi is doing well. In actual case, it is not. This viewpoint holds that such intervention is antithetical to the free market principles Ghana operates under, and that the central bank should cease these measures. This internal debate highlights the complex challenge facing the nation: how to balance the desire for a strong, stable currency with the long-term principles of a sustainable, market-driven economy. Within Ghana, the debate over the government's economic strategy is fierce. Critics argue that the recent decline in the nation's debt-to-GDP ratio, now at 54%, is not a sign of robust economic management. Instead, they contend it is the direct result of a painful debt restructuring program undertaken as a condition of receiving support from the IMF. The government, they claim, has done nothing to resolve the underlying debt situation, but is taking credit for a statistical improvement brought on by these external measures.
This critique expands to a more fundamental question. What is the true measure of economic strength? According to these voices, a strong currency should be the result of real productivity, a thriving manufacturing sector, robust exports, and domestic innovation, not temporary injections of foreign currency. They pose a crucial question. If the average Ghanaian citizen still struggles to afford basic necessities like food, fuel, and rent, what tangible benefit does a statistically strong Cedi provide? Is the government strategy focused on genuine recovery or on maintaining positive optics while the real economy remains in crisis? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on African intel, stories, history, and identity. The scrutiny placed on Ghana by the IMF highlights a significant double standard on the global stage. The same institution that approved a new loan of approximately $360 million for Ghana simultaneously demands that the country's central bank reduce its intervention in the foreign exchange market. This intervention is a primary tool for the Bank of Ghana to combat imported inflation, rising prices driven by a weak exchange rate. This stance is in contrast to the approach taken with Western nations. When the United States faces an economic crisis, it injects trillions of dollars into its economy, a practice referred to not as manipulation, but as stimulus or quantitative easing. These actions face no international condemnation or punishment. The IMF itself has noted that the U.S. can effectively never default on its debt, as its obligations are denominated in a currency it has the sovereign power to print. This double standard is not an accident, but a core feature of the global financial architecture. The critical difference remains. American debt is in its own currency, while African debt is in US dollars. African nations must earn these dollars, and the method for doing so is a cornerstone of a system designed to maintain dependency.
According to this analysis, a founding principle of institutions like the World Bank was to steer African and other developing nations away from food self-sufficiency. Instead, they were encouraged to focus on growing export-oriented cash crops, such as cocoa and other tropical raw materials. The resulting oversupply keeps global commodity prices low, benefiting Western consumers and industries. This economic structure forces developing nations to import staple foods like grain from the United States and Europe. This dependency becomes a powerful political weapon. If a nation pursues policies that the West disapproves of, it can be threatened with sanctions and the withholding of food exports, a tactic the U.S. once attempted against China. Consequently, owing foreign debt in U.S. dollars means these nations must structure their economies around producing what the United States wants, not what their own people need for survival and prosperity. This system ensures that economic control remains firmly in the hands of the creditors. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, are often considered, by some, to be among the most influential and, at times, controversial global organizations. A central critique, as explored in Super Imperialism, 1972, questions the apparent double standard in international finance. For instance, the United States has the unique ability to print its own currency to manage debt. Why then does the IMF insist that African nations repay loans in US dollars, a currency they cannot print, and penalize them for seeking even a fraction of the financial autonomy exercised by Western nations?
Please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on African intel, stories, history, and identity. This issue extends beyond individual countries like Ghana to encompass a global financial order that critics argue perpetuates Africa's economic dependence. A concerning pattern emerges when African countries default on IMF loans. They frequently surrender natural resources, oil, gold, bauxite, lithium, and even farmland, which are then auctioned off to international corporations and foreign governments. This raises a critical question. Is debt merely a tool, a sophisticated mechanism to legally extract Africa's wealth without overt military intervention? Consider the implications if the Ghanaian Cedi were to perform strongly without IMF support. Such a success could undermine the pervasive narrative that Africa is perpetually reliant on external aid. It directly challenges the power dynamic between lender and borrower, which might explain the IMF's deep and consistent involvement in African economic policy, often more so than in other developing regions. This leads to broader inquiries. Why is the IMF consistently focused on Africa? Why does nearly every African economic policy seem to require external validation? Why are African currencies subject to Western observation while Western currencies float freely without comparable scrutiny? And why does African success, achieved on its own terms, often trigger sudden scrutiny or pressure?
Africa's historical engagement with the IMF has been fraught with challenges. Structural adjustment programs have been criticized for crippling public services. Subsidy removals have ignited protests, and currency devaluations have led to inflation and social unrest. Yet this cycle persists, reinforcing the perception that within this system, the only acceptable African government is one that borrows, obeys, and complies. Ghana's efforts to defend its currency can be viewed as an act of economic resistance, a nation daring to define its own monetary policy without seeking Western approval. This prompts a fundamental question. Is the IMF apprehensive of a financially independent Africa? Share your perspectives respectfully in the comments below. Let us foster a meaningful discussion about power, policy, and the future of Africa. We will continue to provide in-depth, fearless analysis. Until then, remain inquisitive, stay informed, and never accept the superficial explanation.